this guy, Doug Day, who was like a kind of a racer guy in Connecticut. And he brought up one of his best friends, this guy, Rick Beasley, who was a product manager at Cannondale Bikes. Never been to northern Maine woods. They come up for Thanksgiving. So John sees this radical bike that this guy has and says, hey, you should go over to the grocery store in town and ask for this guy, Darren. He's a massive mountain biker. He'd love to see that thing. So they did. So Ricky and Doug rode their bikes up to the IGA. So I'm outside working on some grocery carts, collecting grocery carts, and I see these bikes coming, and I'm like, whoa, like another bicycle in town. Like that's crazy by itself. But even more crazy was what I didn't know what I was looking at, because I was like, that's like nothing I've ever seen before. And they were both on the original prototype Cannondale Delta V. It was Cannondale's first ever full suspension bike. And it used a Works Performance rear shock. And I don't even think it had a fork. I think it was a rigid fork, but it had rear suspension. And they were not painted or anything. They were just these raw, like handmade prototypes that they'd made at Bethel.
Welcome, mountain bikers. Thanks for tuning in to Vital MTB's The Inside Line podcast. This week we're honored to have Darren Murphy, founder of Push Industries, join us on the show. We're actually breaking Darren's episode up into two parts. This week we learn all about Darren's history, how he came up, his suspension background, founding Push, where Push is now. And the following Wednesday we'll conclude with an episode where I peppered Darren with any and all assorted suspension questions. Anything we could think that would come up, we want to hear his thoughts on the wizardry and mystery of suspension tuning. Hope you enjoy the show today. Darren has some really interesting background and lots of experience in dealing with all things suspension from day one. Would like to thank Maxxis Tires for being a supporter of the Inside Line podcast. I have never ridden Forecaster tires until about a week ago, and I'm surprised by what they can do. I'm out in sandy, dry conditions. There's supposed to be a wet conditions tire, but I was pretty blown away. They just came on a bike that I had and was really psyched with how they performed. Hit up maxxis.com to check out all their mountain bike tires. Jensen USA, they've been a sponsor of the show since day one as well, and they have that brand new Yeti SB165 on site right now. Go get it. JensenUSA.com. If you use coupon code INSIDELINE, you can get 10% off qualifying items. TheGravityCartel.com. All things Spank and IXS. Amri Pierron just won the last World Cup in IXS gear when he's going 400 miles an hour cornering on sidewalls on ski runs. Didn't seem like he was too worried about hitting the deck with that IXS stuff on there. TheGravityCartel.com. Last but not least, thank you, listeners. Without your stoke, what's the point? Enjoy the show.
Hello, everybody. Baba Booey.
Sick. That was good timing. I just hit record. All right. Let's see.
Testing.
How was your flight?
Really smooth. Actually got in a few minutes early, which was nice.
Yeah, because they heard you were on the plane?
Yeah.
That was a funny
They're
text.
like, we have a VIP. Move him to the front of the plane when he gets on, and then make sure that plane shows up a little early.
Are you going to get all quiet now all of a sudden? You're going to get excited and the levels are going to go way up.
Sorry.
Pull it a little closer. That's better.
This is my normal speaking voice, I guess. Sure?
Yep.
I don't know. Yeah, not good enough?
Yep.
Okay.
That should be good.
Hello.
Hello. Thanks for flying in. Darren Murphy of Push Industries, fresh off an airplane. We're not going to screw around. We're all business today.
Ooh.
We're going to give the listeners what they want right away.
Wow.
We're not going to make them wait. All right. Let the secret out.
I'm feeling slightly intimidated, actually.
What is a Fernertner, and can you spell it?
Ooh,
That's what we've all been wanting to know from day one.
Fernertner. Fernertner is P-H-E-R.
Ooh, P-H?
Yeah.
I spelled it F. Okay.
No. P-H-E-R-N-E-R-T-N-E-R, I guess. I don't actually know. It's been a long time.
Is it a real word?
So back in the old school Romic days, way back in the Romic days, it was me and Roger and Jimmy Donahue, who's now at RockShox, and Jimmy's buddy, Big J, who a lot of people from the old school Norba circuit would remember Big J. He was a Fontucky racer and, kind of old school guy. And Big J, that was his word. So he would come up and help out. I think he helped out at Romick with assembly and stuff from time to time. Okay. And he didn't know what anything was. And so I think he'd be like, oh, you just, pass me that Fnertner over there, And so it just became a thing. And it's that term is still used today at Push. Like, no question, this week someone has said Fnertner, and it's just it's the universal term for, hey.
For whatchamacallit?
Yeah, give me that Fnertner. You got that Fnertner over there? Like, that Fnertner. So,
sweet.
I can't believe you brought that up. I don't know where you pulled that one out from.
Well, we're done. That's the only reason I wanted to come and talk. So.
Really? I thought it was going to be the red boxer stanchions.
Oh, that's in the list right there. Sure. And the fact that Sven got to ride them. Like, are you serious? All right, Vital MTB listeners, welcome to the Inside Line podcast. I'm Sean Spomer, and I have the pleasure of spending the day with Darren Murphy.
Whoa.
Owner, founder, Push Industries.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for coming here. This is the first where someone comes from out of state to Litter Mag Garage headquarters for a podcast.
We've been talking about this, I think, for 2 years now. And we've probably scheduled it a half a dozen different times, and for whatever reason, it's never worked out. And so this last time, obviously, you were coming to Colorado, and I was leaving Colorado, and I finally just said, let's put a date on the calendar. I'll come to you. So here I am.
I love it. Thanks for making it happen.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, we're going to cover it all today, and like I texted earlier, I have you hostage, and it's a good thing because we have a lot to cover.
Awesome.
And you can't go until I say it's time to go.
Perfect.
Because I'm your chauffeur too.
You're my ride.
Before we get into it, how much time in your day is spent answering, when are you going to make an 11.6 for blank bike?
For me, not so much, but for customer service, a lot. Yeah, that is one of the struggles that we didn't realize when we first came to market with 11.6 was how many problems that it was going to create from a customer service perspective because of that, right? Yeah. Because it's not built one size fits all, or because we don't have, like a soft, medium, firm tune or something like that. The way we build 11.6 is so different, and it takes so much more time, and we're a small team of people. And so all those things add up to, we never seem to be able to get applications done quickly enough for people. And even better than that.
Application like being applied to a certain bike?
Yeah, meaning so application's a new bike model, right? So we just launched Mega Tower, Santa Cruz Mega Tower. So that's a new application for us. And the greatest thing in the world is this happens 100% of the time. We get constant, communications via email and phone and online chat, and Instagram, direct message, all this stuff about Mega Tower, Mega Tower, Mega Tower. Okay, great. We finally released Mega Tower. And the moment it's released and it shows up on Instagram or the website, people are onto, well, what about the Stumpy? What about the Stumpy? It's like, so every time we have something, a new application, it seems like everyone who is beating us up about it now is like onto something different or whatever. So it doesn't matter how many new applications we launch. Every time we launch one, it just inundates us with, well, you just launched this, so when are you going to do this?
Yeah.
So anyway, it's pretty funny.
That's funny. It introduced problems you weren't even aware of.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, never could foresee that one for sure. Yeah.
We'll get to the business. We're going to kind of break it up as like push business, that whole thing. We'll get your history. Then we'll go into just kind of general suspension, tuning questions, all that jazz. Yeah. Before we go there, what's the most requested 11.6 bike application? Like, is it a Nomad? Is whatever? Is one hands down more than another?
No, it's very dynamic, and it really the hottest 11.6 application is always whatever the hottest new bike that was just released. Mm-hmm. So anytime a manufacturer releases a new bike, we immediately start getting, and it happens all the time where we actually will start fielding emails within the hour of, Santa Cruz launching a new bike on Vital, and it's with a lot of the manufacturers, that is what has changed over the last 2 years specifically, is now we work much more closely with the manufacturers. So even though we don't have OEM business with them, they now are giving us the heads up. So most of the
Wow.
Most of the larger manufacturers now are communicating with our engineers on fitment and clearance and those types of things long before the bike comes to market. So that's something that's changed over the last year and a half for sure.
Yeah.
So there are some bikes that we have a good heads up on, but a lot of them we don't, because in today's environment, companies are still trying to hold. So while they may work with us on fitment, we don't know what it is necessarily, right? So you take a bike like the Mega Tower, we have a fitment maybe, but we don't. Well, a great example was, I can probably talk about this, was the Yeti SB150. SB150 was a bike that we knew about from a fitment very early, but we didn't know what the bike was.
Crazy, yeah.
Yeah, so we were able to communicate with Yeti's engineers with Stretch on fitment and packaging and all that stuff, but we didn't know what it was going to be. And so
does that allow you to design the chassis and then you figure the guts out later once you know what the bike is?
Yeah, it was one of those, like the SB150 needed the side stack bridge configuration, so our current shock didn't fit it.
Okay.
And so then the conversation turns to, okay, what are the options? And for us, the option was, well, we can make a new head unit, shape it differently, which is what we did. And so we had an envelope that we could work within, but we had no idea what the bike was going to be.
Yeah.
And so then when the bike comes out, at least we have a bit of a head start, but it still takes us a while. Then you have the other angle, which is Evil, who we work really closely with and have an OEM relationship with, where like the new offering was launched with ElevenSix, because that's a bike in prototype form that we tested and used and,
okay,
all that type of stuff.
Yeah, cool.
So the point of that being that a lot of times when the consumers see the bike is when we see the bike.
Yeah.
So we might know that there's a new bike. We might know that we're going to fit it physically, but we don't know any more than that. And so when the bike comes out, then the manufacturer says, oh, here you go. This is the bike we were talking about. And yes, physically you fit it, and we'll work on getting you a bike. So now you can, work on the application.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. We'll dive more into that whole process, but
yeah,
let's go the route we always go and kind of give us the Cliff Notes version of your mountain bike history, how you got here, all that good stuff.
I'm old now, so it's been a while.
How old? You look like you're 28.
Yeah, going to be 29 or 46 here in a few days. Yeah, a lot of people. I grew up, got exposed to BMX way early on, and for me it was something where I wasn't really a bike rider as a young kid. My dad taught me how to ride a bike and whatnot, but I wasn't really a cyclist. I grew up in a super small town in northern Maine, 3,000 people.
Oh, northern Maine.
Northern Maine, yeah.
Really?
Yeah, way up in the sticks.
Yeah.
3,000 people. It was a paper mill town. Huh. And the paper mill was responsible for either all of the white pages or all of the yellow pages. I can't remember which one it was. But they made that paper.
That was a lot of pages back then.
Back in the day, right? Which is why it's a ghost town now. But the short version, Dad worked in the mill. Mom was stay-at-home mom, and hunting, fishing, trapping, snowmobiling, dirt bikes, ATVs, boats, like that was life in Millinocket, Maine. Okay. Cycling was not a thing. So I learned how to ride a bike on an old Schwinn Stingray, like banana seat type bike. Mm-hmm. I have memories of that, but cycling wasn't a thing. So fast forward a few years, unfortunately my dad passed away when I was 12, which was super crushing to me. Yeah. As a kid growing up in a small town, family was, really tight-knit group of people. Mm-hmm. And so I lost my dad to cancer and was spinning out of control, basically. So everyone around, our friends and family, my brother and I trying to figure out, how do we pick up these pieces? And so my next door neighbor raced BMX, and I saw his bike, but I didn't really know what it was. And so his family invited me out to a BMX race. And I didn't know it, but there was a guy in town, this guy, John Raymond, who was a former amateur motocross racer, worked in the paper mill, and just wanted something for the kids of Millinocket to be able to do. And so he got the old landfill, got permission to use the old landfill, and he and some friends built a BMX track and built a gate and had lights, and it was super pro status.
No way.
Yeah, in northern Maine, middle of nowhere. So my neighbors bring me to this BMX race, and I've never seen anything like this. And it's just the coolest thing. There's just kids everywhere and people running around and racing bikes, and there's, just food and drinks. And it was just a place where families could go, and it was a place to get kids out of trouble type thing, or give them something to do, not really keep them out of trouble. And so I thought, wow, that was really cool. That looked neat. So then I, begged my mom basically to get me a BMX bike because I wanted to check that out.
Yep.
And I got my first Diamondback BMX bike, just like entry level, like one piece crank, like coaster brake, like really old school BMX bike. And I went up with my neighbor again and got to race, and just jeans and a t-shirt, paper plate on the front with a magic marker, and I got in the gate, and basically I won 3 motos. I went 1-1-1 and it was just like, holy cow, this was the greatest experience of my life. So then John, who had this little bicycle shop in his like back shed and was running this track, he had a van, he painted bicycle works on the side of it, and he was just trying to do this thing. So then he offered me a ride up to an even further northern Maine town called Presque Isle to do a BMX race with a bunch of kids.
That's crazy.
And their families.
There's a scene in northern Maine.
Right,
Yeah.
it was big. Well, at the time, it seemingly was big.
Yeah.
So I was all in. And my mom said I could go. And so, my neighbors, so anyway, a bunch of kids that I knew, everybody went up to Presque Isle to race. And same thing, I'm in jeans and a shirt and my paper plate, my coaster brake bike. And I go 1-1-1 again in motos.
Way.
And so now confidence is incredibly high. And so I just fall in love with BMX. And just to add this in, I sprouted early. So the reason why I was doing so well was not because I was some phenom, but I was so much bigger than all of the other kids.
Okay.
Which now, having raised 2 boys, I understand, as you're in sports, you can have 5 12-year-old boys lined up, and they can vary by, a foot in height. And so I just happened to be that kid that was 12 years old, but was, 6 foot tall and 160 pounds. I was like a man child,
yeah.
But it didn't matter. Right. Cause I thought I was a champion.
Sure.
But the long and short of it is that that experience connected me to cycling and gave me that mental kind of escape that I needed at that time. So BMX became my mental escape from, life. And so I spent every waking moment, I'd ride from the house up to the BMX track and with friends. And I was on my bike constantly. Continued to race and continued to do well. Again, I'll say some skill, but mainly because of my size. Started to travel outside of state, so then I started traveling into New Hampshire and Vermont, and other places. And so, I just fell in love with it. So it was like, it became a huge passion and this mental release. And it just was something I was doing nonstop. Every waking moment, I was on my bike reading BMX Action or BMX Plus or whatever. And that's how I got my start.
Okay.
And then that morphed into, mountain bikes. Mountain bikes started becoming a thing. I got into high school, really wanted to look at mountain bike. I wanted to be a professional BMX racer. I am in northern Maine thinking I'm going to be a professional BMX racer. Because once I found out people got paid to do that, I was like, wait, that's a job?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to go after that. And then I saw the mountain bike scene was really starting to grow. So this would have been like 1988, I guess. And mountain biking was a big thing. And I got myself my first mountain bike because John's shop had an account with Seattle Bike Supply at the time. So they were doing Redline mountain bikes.
Yeah.
So I was able to buy a Redline mountain bike, and stopped BMX altogether and just fell in love with mountain bikes. And the same thing, every waking moment was spent on a mountain bike. And I thought I was going to be a mountain bike racer.
Was it hilly where you were in Maine?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't very hilly, but it was really technical. You know. So what happened was we had this massive array of snowmobile trails. So the town, one of the big attractions to Millinocket was snowmobile in the wintertime for the tourists because we were backed up to Baxter State Park. Okay. And so in the summertime, all of those snowmobile trails became mountain bike trails for me because I was the only person in the town that had a mountain bike.
No way.
And so I just hours and hours on end all by myself. And it wasn't much elevation, a little bit here and there, but it was mostly just wet and rooty. So my skills, my base fundamentals actually developed pretty strong early on because of the type of terrain that I was riding. Yeah. And, I'm sure if I went back there today, I'd look at those trails and say, wow, this is nothing. But at the time it was everything.
For sure.
It
And
was the most amazing thing in the world.
Yeah, you're pioneering it yourself. You don't have a huge example or kind of group of people to show you.
No, people in that town thought I was strange, including my own family. They just didn't get it. They didn't understand it. They thought it was a big mistake. Thought it took away from my studies at school. It caused a lot of problems because I was literally the one cyclist in this town.
In the whole town.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. So where does it go from there? Like, how do you get out of Maine?
Well, I hadn't thought about this story for a while. So I'm working at local grocery store, riding mountain bikes, and trying to figure out what I'm going to do with my life. At this point, I'm committed to going to University of Maine.
Okay.
Either do mechanical engineering or business.
Okay.
Oddly enough, two totally random things.
Were you inclined towards tinkering or math or design?
I was always
stuff?
mechanical, and that's the other thing that bikes brought me, right? Is the ability to, so John's shop, his workshop shed was open, like any time, night or day. I could go in there and just spin spanners, and so I was just in heaven, having all these tools and mechanical items, and I was taking stuff apart and then not being able to get it back together like every Grom was, right? Uh-huh. But that's how you learn. And so I always was really excited mechanically. So, I thought about the mechanical side from an engineering standpoint, but the business side, because I said, hey, I want to open a bike shop, so I was kind of torn. I knew it was going to be cycling related, and I knew at that point that I wasn't going to be a professional racer.
Okay.
So trying to figure it out, and got accepted to the University of Maine. And it was Thanksgiving, the year before I graduated high school. And one of John's childhood friends came up to visit his family. This guy, Doug Day, who was like a kind of a racer guy in Connecticut. And he brought up one of his best friends, this guy, Rick Beasley, who was a product manager at Cannondale Bikes. Never been to northern-Maine woods. They come up for Thanksgiving. So John sees this radical bike that this guy has and says, hey, you should go over to the grocery store in town and ask for this guy, Darren. He's a massive mountain biker. He'd love to see that thing.
Yeah.
So they did. So Ricky and Doug rode their bikes up to the IGA. So I'm outside working on some grocery carts, collecting grocery carts, and I see these bikes coming, and I'm like, whoa, like, another bicycle in town. Like this, that's crazy by itself. But even more crazy was what I didn't know what I was looking at.
Yeah.
Because I was like, that's like nothing I've ever seen before. And they were both on the original prototype Cannondale Delta V. It was Cannondale's first ever full suspension bike, and it used a Works Performance rear shock. And I don't even think it had a fork. I think it was a rigid fork, but it had rear suspension.
Yeah.
And they were not painted or anything. They were just these raw, like handmade prototypes that they'd made at Bethel.
Wow.
And so I'm looking at this thing, and of course I'm going berserk because I don't know what I'm looking at. Who are these people?
It's like aliens landed in your town.
Yeah. And this one guy says, hey, we're looking for Darren. And I was like, that's me. Uh-huh. And he says, hey, your buddy John says that you can show us around and take us mountain biking. And I was like, absolutely. So I went in and talked to the manager and said, hey, can I leave early?
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, you can go. And so I took them out on a mountain bike ride and kind of befriended them. And Ricky, at the end of the day, basically said, hey, this was great. I'm going to be leaving Cannondale, and I'm starting a bike shop. You had mentioned that you were interested in bike shop or whatever. He says, here's my number. Just let me know what you're doing.
No way.
Yeah. So then...
Where was the shop going to be?
In Connecticut.
Okay.
Yeah. So then I was sparked, right? Now I'm on such a high because for the first time, I've communicated with like-minded people, other than John. John and his family in town, they were big into cycling.
Sure.
Right? Or trying to get everybody excited in cycling. But this was the first time I had met someone who knew what a mountain bike was and was way into it and worked at Cannondale Bikes. Like, are you kidding me?
Yeah,
you
they have
work
raw
at Cannondale?
prototypes. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was just, my head was spinning. And so it was probably a week later. So I religiously got Mountain Bike Action in the mail, right? Just lived. So like, if I wasn't riding my bike, I was reading Mountain Bike Action, and I read every issue 300 times until the next one came. And I got an issue of Mountain Bike Action, and in the back was an ad for United Bicycle Institute. And I was like, what is that?
Yeah.
So again, this is pre-internet and all that stuff. So I I phoned the number on Monday and they said, yeah, give us your address and we'll send you a packet. And so I did that. And I got this packet from UBI that talked about the bicycle mechanics school and this, that, and the other thing. And I was now I'm like, there's a school for this. I'm all in. I had paid a deposit, like $5,000 to University of Maine, of my own money. And I just was like, I'm out. I'm going to UBI. Huh. And so I backed out of college and I flew. This is my first time, like flying. And I flew to Oregon, Asheville, and went to UBI and started in the basic mechanics class and then went intermediate and wheel building. I took all the classes and I was one of the few people that was there over the weekends because the way the coursework was is people would come in for like an advanced, class, or they'd come in for a specialty class like wheel building. But I was there from start to finish. I was like, I want all of it. Yeah. I'm going to take all of it. And so I went to UBI, and while I was there, I called Rick and I said, I'm at UBI. I'm going to leave here with all of my mechanics credentials. So if there's an opportunity, I want it. And he said, when you get home, pack up and come down. We've got the space. We're going to start building out the shop, and you've got a job. I'll take you.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So to Connecticut you go?
Mm-hmm. So I did. I went to UBI, which is an absolutely great experience.
Yeah, how was that? You're in the presence of kind of people that are like-minded now. Yeah. It's like, you'd seen Rick and the other guy, but
absolutely awesome experience. Met a lot of really great people and people who became, long-term friends. So like, Andrew and Preston, who started BTI, distribution. Okay. They were working downstairs at United Bicycle Products, I think was the name of the company, distribution company. Yeah. They ended up breaking out on their own and starting BTI. And so I had met them there and knew them. Huh. And that was a relationship, I had all the way up until, Andrew passed recently, unfortunately. Still, see Preston, a couple times a year at industry events and whatnot. But yeah, it was mind-blowing, right? Because mountain bikes and mechanics and all of the big names, the stuff that I had read about in magazines, like Mavic this and, Campy that and Shimano this. And it's like, you get to see it, you get to work on it. It was like, wow, this is amazing. Yeah. And then I did. So I packed up, I went back to Maine and immediately packed up and drove to Connecticut and crashed on Rick's couch for a couple of weeks while I figured out a place to stay and helped him build the first store. So which was, took us maybe a month before we went live and opened the doors to the store. And I thought I had made the dream. Like we're opening a brand new bike shop in Connecticut. And I'm the master mechanic. So, yeah.
I know we got to move along a little bit, but what was it like once there were customers coming in? Was it always the dream? Was there ever a point where like, ooh, this isn't what I thought it would be? Like anything like that?
It was definitely different than I thought it was going to be, but all of it was incredibly exciting, incredibly intoxicating, because I was finally surrounded by bikes all day, all night. I didn't have a car. I worked in Trumbull and lived in Shelton. It was like an hour bike ride every day and all the shit weather and all that stuff. But even that didn't matter,
Committed, yeah.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
and it was just because I was making no money, and I didn't have any money. So I had no money and wasn't making any money at the time, but was just totally driven by passion. And like so many people in the industry. But yeah, it was different, but awesome. Like every aspect about it was awesome. We still had a relationship with Cannondale because Rick had worked there for so long. Okay. And because the shop was close by Cannondale's headquarters at the time. And so a few sneak peeks, at Cannondale behind the scenes office was, pretty cool. So you get those little perks, right? Which were like, oh, wow, that's amazing how a bike company actually works, or seeing a prototype that nobody's seen before. Yeah. And then the opportunity of sales reps coming in and giving me stuff to try, was the newest stuff. Like, whoa, this was amazing. Uh-huh. And so, yeah, right up until the end, it was pretty good. I did that for like 3 or 4 years, and it was, it was a great experience.
Okay. And then, so what was next?
So, going back to John in Millinocket. So in his work shed, he had all these motorcycle parts. Mm-hmm. And there was a motorcycle shock, like off an old Honda Elsinore. And I was always fascinated with the shock absorber. And so I asked him, like, hey, can I take this thing apart? And he said, sure. And so I took it apart and exploded all over me. And, it was a total nightmare, right? But so I thought that was really cool. And then he started, he wanted to do some amateur motorcycle road racing. Okay. So he bought a new Honda Hurricane, and it needed stiffer rear spring, change out the fork springs, change the oil level, had to safety wire it, take all that. So I was involved with him, helping him do all that stuff. And so changing out fork springs in a motorcycle fork was just fascinating to me. I was like, wow, this is incredible. So this is still when I'm in high school.
Sure.
So then when we get to the bike shop, fast forward to the bike shop, RockShox has come out with their RS1 fork, and there's a lot of chatter about mountain bike suspension. Marzocchi started building stuff, Manitou. So now we have suspension. Cannondale was doing their head shock stuff, which at the time Marzocchi was making. They had the Super V that came with a Marzocchi rear air shock and a Marzocchi air fork cartridge that went in the head shock.
Okay.
So I had some association with Marzocchi because we were a big Cannondale dealer, obviously. Yeah. And I met the general manager at the time, Jim Mahan, at a national in Vermont. Like I went up to a race. I was still doing some, racing. Went up to the national in Vermont, and Marzocchi had a pit there. I met Jim Mahan and, kind of became friendly with him and whatnot. We stayed in touch a little bit, and he said, hey, would you ever consider coming out to Anaheim for Interbike and helping us work the booth? Because I was starting to sell a lot of Marzocchi. I was like really driving Marzocchi on the East Coast. And
through the shop.
Yeah, through the shop. And I was servicing them, which nobody was doing, right? So I had all the tools. I had bought all the tools and got all the supplies and was servicing those things. Yeah. And actually, so I had a relationship with the Marzocchi guys, or really Jim specifically. I knew Bryson a little bit, but it was really Jim. And Bernard and Hassabuske. Remember him?
No, I don't. That's a complicated name. No, that's before my time. I think,
so Bernard was like, he's old school, like David Cullinan and Bernard and Wayne Crosdale and Jake Watts and all those guys.
Yep.
So anyway, so they flew me out to Anaheim, and I went and worked Interbike with them as a sales guy, and was super excited and was telling dealers how, what we were doing to be successful. And so they liked that. They liked that they had like an actual representative from a bike shop telling bike shop guys how successful we were at doing it. And this is how we were doing it. So that was really great. And then shortly after that, they came out with the Marzocchi DH3, their first like 70 or 75 millimeter downhill fork. I got one of the first ones. And when I got it, it wasn't working properly. And so I didn't know what was going on. It wouldn't function. And so I took out the valve that was in the fork leg and found that it was drilled backwards. And so I immediately contacted Jim and I said, hey, I just got this fork and the holes are drilled backwards. So the oil won't go through on compression. It'll only come through on rebound. And so they looked and they found that there was just a mishap at the factory. And so all the forks they had there had this valve that was backwards. And so then Jim was really kind of excited about, hey, you ever consider working for Marzocchi, like in technical services, as a technician. And we started those conversations, and it wasn't long after that they offered me a job to move to California and work as a wrench at Marzocchi in Valencia. Yeah, so I had this interest in suspension and made my way to California and went to work for Marzocchi, which again was just another mind-numbing experience.
Yeah, you'd been out for Interbike to Anaheim.
Yeah.
What was it like moving there? Was it the promised land because you'd been reading mountain bike action your whole life, or was it
100%? Yeah. I mean, California was the goal. Very happy in Connecticut at the time, but California was the goal because I grew up, again, BMX action, BMX plus, mountain bike action, all that stuff. So yeah, the idea was great. I get to Valencia. I drove cross country in my Honda Civic, my bike's on my roof, all my shit in my car.
Sweet.
And I get to, I made it all the way to I think it was Bakersfield, which is a beautiful area. So my first experience, was in Bakersfield at some motel. And so then the next day I get up early and I drive to Valencia and I get to the Marzocchi office and I'm so pumped. And someone downstairs like, yeah, Jim's upstairs, you can go say hey to him. So I go up there and I'm quickly realizing I don't think anyone at Marzocchi knows I'm coming. No one downstairs really seemed like they knew who I was.
You've been driving for a week, all pumped,
Yeah, sold everything I owned. Yeah. So I go upstairs and Jim's there, and Bryson is there, and I could tell by the look on Bryson's face, he knew who I was, obviously, but was definitely had the look of what the hell is he doing here? How did he get here? So I think Jim had basically offered me a job that didn't exist, and that he was just going to basically work out once I got there.
No.
So we're standing there, and Bryson's looking at me, and I can clearly tell that he might be a little confused. And Jim's like high-fiving, let's do this.
Okay, so he's pumped. He's not like, Jim, came out.
Jim's pumped. No, Jim was clearly pulling the move where, I'm going to get him out here and convince everybody that this guy's going to be a good fit. So we start high-fiving and whatnot, and then all of a sudden the building starts to shake. I experienced my first earthquake.
The day you got there?
Yeah, like within minutes. I'd been at Marzocchi for like 10 minutes, and the building starts to shake, and I'm tripping a little bit, like, whoa, what is going on? And nobody's even paying attention to it. They're just, oh yeah, this is just a small one. No big deal, That was a little trippy too.
It's trippy.
And then, ultimately,
found your way.
I got a job. I showed up for work and became part of the team, and was part of that original group that put the original bomber together.
No way, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, actually, Jim and I were the first. I'll never forget. I get a phone call from Jim or something like that. I can't remember how it went down, but basically, we got to go over to Bryson's house. He just got back from Italy, and we knew that they were working on something. Or maybe other people knew more than I did. I knew they were working on something, didn't know what it was. But I'm going to come pick you up. We got to go over to Bryson's house. And it was like Saturday morning, really early. I'm like, okay, let's get in the car. He picks me up. We go over to Bryson's house. And Bryson opens the garage, and he's got this big-ass bike bag. He pulls the bike bag out, and he starts unzipping it, and it's just covered in shit. It's just dirt and all this stuff. And it's an Alpine Stars full suspension bike, back in the day. Yeah. So Alpine Stars full suspension bike. And on the front of it is what looks like a motorcycle fork, right?
I bet, yeah.
So this is the first time that anyone in the U.S., well, outside of Bryson, the first time a bomber was brought to U.S. soil, because Bryson had flown back from Italy with it in a bike bag. And so he pulls that thing out, puts it in the work stand, and starts putting it together. And we're just mesmerized, right?
Yeah.
You're looking at this. It was I think those were 32 millimeter, like hard chrome steel stanchions. And it was huge for the time. I mean, everybody who was around that era remembers that thing was
dwarfed the existing forks.
100%. Yeah. And so he gets it all put together, and there's these stairs down near his house. And he said, hop on this thing and just go ride those stairs. And Jim did it, and then I did it, and then the three of us sat there just in awe. Bryson's laughing at us because he'd been over in Italy riding it.
Yeah.
And just never had seen or heard or felt anything like that. And that was the first time that I saw the original bomber prototype. And it was just all not painted, just raw castings and steel stanchions. And it had all this adjustability. And yeah, the first time you rode it, it was just, you knew it was something really, really special.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of a cool thing, to be a part of that original.
Oh, heck yeah. Are you kidding?
Original program. That was cool.
Yeah. Was it, did you feel like, all right, like kind of legit moto technology, for the lack of a better word, or like size and durability is coming? Yeah,
and it's one of those things where a bunch of us at Marzocchi rode moto because there's a Castaic motocross track nearby, and I had a KTM at the time 250 with Marzocchi Magnum 50 front forks, and so that bomber looked like a miniature Magnum 50, and so I mean it was one of those things where we all instantly knew it was going to be like this massive success because there had been so much tinkering in downhill racing and again, being part of that SoCal scene and doing, that was when obviously, not AMA, the Northern Nationals and Big Bear and Mammoth, like these were all really big scale events. In fact, I'm pretty sure we rolled out the bomber prototypes with Giovanni Bonazzi maybe at Mammoth. Might have been the first time it saw public. I may be wrong on that one. But yeah, I mean, it was this massive motorcycle. It was just crazy. It was just a crazy time that we all knew this was going to be, it It was going to be big.
Yeah,
and to be part of that was awesome. That was an awesome experience.
Hey, come to Bryson's house. You got to see this.
Yeah, and it was so bizarre. And Bryson's got the shitty grin on his face, you know, because he knows, you know. So he just got the shitty grin on his face, and rolls up the garage door and pulls out a bike bag, and like, whoa. And you know that he did the same thing. You know, when he went to Italy and saw it for the first time.
Yep.
You know, he might have seen the drawings ahead of time, but you know when he saw it the first time, and the first time he went down a set of stairs, you know, he was, you know, he was giddy like a little school kid too.
For sure.
Yeah.
So how long at Marzocchi and then keep going here? Yeah,
not very long. So Marzocchi was a great experience. First time I got to travel internationally, got to go to the factory, got to go to Nevegal, to the World Cup. So I was doing tech support. So doing all the nationals, working out of the trailer, working out of the shop back in Valencia, getting to go to the factory. Great experience, but pretty short-lived because I was big into motorcycles and big into mountain bikes. And I don't actually remember how, but I was approached at a race by these three guys.
At a mountain bike race?
Yeah, at a mountain bike race. And they were asking me questions about suspension and this and that. And the one guy says, hey, well, would you be willing to go talk to some people at our Southern California office when you're back in town? And handed me this card. And it was for Eibach. And I was intrigued, didn't know what it was. Later found out it was Wilfred Eibach.
Like who actually spoke to you?
Yeah.
Whoa.
And so went to Southern California and went to their office in Irvine and met with a team of people and just started talking. They had all kinds of questions about all kinds of things. And what had happened was Eibach they owned the automotive market, right? Racing and automotive, both in OEM and aftermarket. They owned the four-wheel vehicle space. They had been approached by a company, a new company at the time, which was Mountain Speed, to make speed springs, right?
Yeah.
Speed springs, fork springs. So one of the guys, Josh and his partner, I can't remember his partner's name, but his partner was big into IndyCar racing and stuff like that. So he knew of Eibach from road car racing.
Okay.
He approached Eibach about making fork springs for mountain bikes. Eibach starts making these things for him, but doesn't really know what they're getting into. And all of a sudden the orders start coming in hot and heavy. Because as we all know, converting Judys from elastomers to springs was a huge thing back in the day. And same thing with Manitous and whatnot. So Eibach was feeling a little overwhelmed because they didn't have anybody inside that spoke the language. And so that's why I was there. So they just basically said, hey, we've been dabbling with the idea of motorcycle fork springs and shock springs. We've got this new mountain bike thing going on. We don't really have anybody who speaks the language. What do you think? Yeah. And it was interesting to me at the time, but I was pretty excited at Marzocchi. And it really came down to, they just were like, well, here's a salary offer. And I was like, oh, okay, that's a lot more money.
Like, all right, I got to do something. Yeah.
And their facility was so impressive. Their facility in Irvine, I mean, Eibach is still today, right? They're a massive global corporation, very fancy offices and conference rooms, super high-end production, clean, everything is spotless, full race department. And I was like, yeah, this is kind of my jam.
Yeah.
And so while I wasn't unhappy at Marzocchi, I didn't want to pass this offer up. It just seemed like it was something I could get in on the ground level. And I took it, and it was awesome. So then went to work for Eibach. And that, the interesting fact about that is White Brothers at the time was, I think, the U.S.'s largest motorcycle distribution company. And was starting to get into some mountain bike stuff, Judy cartridges and whatnot. Dan White, who was one of the brothers of White Brothers, was a big mountain biker. And he and I used to ride mountain bikes together in Aliso Canyon down in Southern California on Thursday nights. And so when I was starting to get this motorcycle thing packaged up at Eibach, I basically started talking to Dan about distribution, like a White Brothers private label spring and this and that. So long story short, we started doing a lot of business in motorcycle really quickly because of that relationship with Dan, which then allowed me other opportunities at Eibach, basically.
Outside of bicycle.
Outside of bicycle and outside of springs. Because most people don't know Eibach has a lot of involvement in dampers.
Okay. And so is that what you went into, was damper design? And
well, I got really lucky. So I was working at Eibach, that was going really well, and had a lot of experience, was getting to go into the motorcycle companies. So getting to see Honda's internal departments and Kawasaki's internal departments was really cool. Got exposed to a bunch of neat stuff, met a lot of people. But the turning point for me was this guy, John Wills. So he had a company called Suspension Technologies Australia. And he was a big suspension engineer, had worked for a lot of the big damper companies. And Eibach had him on contract for, I think, a year and a half, because they were trying to, I think at the time they were building in Formula 3000 racing in Europe, spec tire, spec suspension, engine, all that stuff. And Wilfred wanted to have the shock spec. Like he wanted to be an Eibach spring and damper.
Okay.
And so John Wills was brought in with a team of people to basically develop this spec shock, high-end spec shock for a Formula 3000. So John was here in the U.S., in Irvine, working out of the same facility, a couple doors down from me. Didn't know anybody. I was staying at like an extended stay. And so he and I spent a lot of time together. And so he taught me how to run a dyno. And we went out to lunch, and I was always asking questions. And I was this young kid that was inquisitive about everything. And he was just a super nice guy and would tear down shocks and build stuff up. And
like to show you how to do it, like how it all works.
Right. And so, talk about fast lining, understanding of dampers, is to have this guy who's near retirement, who's for 50 years been a shock absorber expert for big companies. And had worked with high-end race teams, BMW and Ford's rally program. And had been around it all. Yeah. And to now be able to just absorb all the information. So that's where I learned everything about shock absorbers, valve design and pistons and seals.
PhD quality stuff right there. Yeah,
it was incredible. I owe a great debt of gratitude to John, for sure. John Raymond as a kid and John Wills as an adult. Because he taught me everything about springs and dampers and stuff take you a decade to learn. It's like you almost learn it in a year because of you're so exposed. And I was single at the time, and didn't have any responsibility. I didn't have any responsibility. So, hey, after work, you want to go grab burgers and beers? Like, yeah, sure. And then we turn into 3 hours at the bar talking about, this is why a replenished spring is designed the way it is. And this is why Coney does it this way and Sachs does it this way. And this is why Bill Stein is doing it this way. And it's like, oh, okay. So it was awesome. So I got exposed to all that stuff.
Yeah. Straight into the voodoo of it all.
Yeah. So, and balance that with Eibach as my full-time job. So learning the ins and outs of high-end spring manufacturing. It was a perfect storm for me. Yeah. Yeah.
So what brought you back into mountain biking? Did you go to Romick from there?
No.
Okay.
There was I had a brief period. I left Eibach. Not a lot of people are going to recognize this one, but I might as well talk about it because there are people out there who will say, hey, you left that out. I met a couple of guys that were looking to buy mountain bikes. Yeah. And they were mountain bike enthusiasts, but didn't know anything about manufacturing. They were marketing guys. Okay. And the mountain cycle brand was either up for sale or kind of, something was going on with it. Anyway, it didn't end up working out. And so we ended up designing our own bike. And it was called Chuck. So if you're familiar with Chuck
for sure.
bikes,
didn't it basically use the same front end? Like a monocoque front end hardtail.
And no, full monocoque. So that was what was unique, is the rear end was monocoque. So Chuck Bikes was myself and these two other guys.
See, that's my mountain bike action experience from back in the day. Like, wow, look at that Chuck thing. That's crazy.
Yeah, it was a super high-end, all monocoque bike. They were made in Elsinore down the street from Intense.
Wow, really?
Yeah. Huh. But, so I went a long way around. I kind of ended up at Chuck. And that was really good until it ended up in a big lawsuit. And one of the partners didn't work out so well. So we'll just leave it at that. We'll just leave it at that.
All right.
Yeah.
So you huck Chuck, and where are you going?
Romick.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Romick existed, right? Sorta?
No.
Was this all secret? Like, was it?
No, I'm just thinking, listen, it was a time in my life that I don't want to say that I like to forget, but it wasn't the best opportunity. Yeah. The Chuck thing really threw me into kind of an entrepreneurial environment, which is something, I didn't really expect. And then that morphed into Romic, which was another kind of entrepreneurial environment. And it was another environment where there was a number of people involved and not a lot of agreement.
Okay.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so while it had success, Romic back in the day, our OEM business and our aftermarket business and the potential for the company was pretty strong.
Mm-hmm. I had a Dirtworks Slalamander with a Romic on the back.
Of course you did. Rob from Dirtworks. Yeah. We had, that's how I met, obviously, recently I was listening to Colin Bailey, on the podcast, and met Colin in April and Kirkcaldy with Max's team because they were running Romics, so we built all the shocks for those guys. And that was Northern Nationals were still a big thing, and we had a trailer and the whole thing. Anyway, long story short, I think it could have had a massive opportunity, but it just wasn't, everybody wasn't on the same page.
Okay.
Which is basically where Push came from, because I was doing some consulting on the side for some pretty large companies and was getting
suspension brands.
Yeah. Motorcycle industry.
Okay.
And so it was kind of a situation where Romic was a bumpy road. I was doing side work, consulting, and getting 5-star reviews on products that nobody knew I had any involvement in. Mm-hmm. And my wife really kind of starting to poke me, like, maybe you should consider doing something, but you doing something, not having other people involved.
That's cool. She's pushing you.
Yeah. So it was really Christina, my wife, Christina, who she just kind of started, she believed in me very early on and just said, what if it was you? Like, what if you could make the decisions you wanted to make? What if you could do it the way you wanted to do? Good or bad, rise or fall, not going to say that you're a genius and they're all going to work, but, what if? And so we started talking about it and ultimately decided we had some equity in our house in Southern California. And she's the one, again, who suggested, let's pull the equity out of the house and let's start something. And I believe you. I believe in you. I support you. Let's do it.
Crazy.
Yeah. And so that was right when the internet was kind of really getting some legs. This was 2002.
Okay.
And so the big thing for us was securing a web domain, right? That's what we felt.
Get the .com.
Yeah, at the time we felt like that was the most important thing.
Yeah.
And so we were trying to come up with a company name. And here's two people who are, my wife at the time was a special agent for the federal government, and myself working in bicycle suspension. Neither one of us had any kind of marketing or anything like that. So coming up with a logo or a name, that's not our jam, right? And so anyway, we were kind of talking about it and whatnot. And at that time, I was living next to Trabuco Canyon, so I could ride right from my house into Trabuco Hills and mountain bike. And so I was like, I'm just going to go for a ride. So I got on my mountain bike, left the garage, went on a mountain bike ride, and was climbing up. It was like maybe a 45-minute climb to the top and then descent down behind Oakley and back to the house. And about halfway up the climb, I just was gassed. It was just one of those days, we've all had it, just not feeling it. Mm-hmm. And I was sitting there and it's like, am I going to turn around? Am I going to keep going? What am I going to do? And I decided, you know what? It's so beautiful out today. That descent's going to be awesome because no one's out here today. If I can just push, myself to go a little bit further, I'll get that descent. Huh. And then I was like, that's it, right? Push. How many times have I been around motorcycle racers or car racers or mountain bike racers or whatever? And that's what it takes, right? You have to push.
Yeah.
The pain of climbing or this or that, you just have to push. And I said, that's it. It's push. And so I went back kind of charged to the house and I said...
Yeah, were you on fire? Like, that's it, I got it.
Yeah, we got it. Yeah, so we got it. It's going to be called Push. And so then we started, push.com. Well, I was taken and this and that. And so ultimately, the reason the company's called Push Industries is because Push Industries, we didn't know what the company was going to be yet.
It's all about, you got to have a name at least, right?
Yeah. Didn't want to call it Push Suspension or, Push Street Tacos. And then,
pigeonhole it into something, sure.
So it had to be general. So we just said, well, industries, that's like vague.
Yeah. That's kind of early 2000s, like SoCal, everything industries, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, of course. And so, pushindustries.com was available. And so I immediately bought it up, and we owned pushindustries.com, and it was kind of an exciting moment. And my wife just said, go do it.
We're a business.
Yeah. Like, let's put it together. Let's put it together. And so I left Romick and found a little warehouse space in Irvine, California, down the street from Shimano.
Well, when did you figure out what you wanted to do?
So I knew I wanted to do something suspension related because at the time I was designing suspension components for a really well-known motorcycle company. And
is this all like CAD stuff? Like you're working with them, sending files?
Yep.
All that? Okay.
Yeah. So they have a big racing effort. And so I was developing parts for the race team and some other things. And so it was one of those situations where I knew that I could take that motorcycle stuff and basically adapt it into mountain bikes. I love motorcycles. I love mountain bikes. Some of these motorcycle parts I was making was really cool, and I could put that into mountain bike format. And so I said, okay, well, I'm going to kind of, take a look at that. And I actually should back it up just a little bit because Paul Theed at Race Tech was a friend of mine. And I ran into him at a trade show in Vegas. And we were talking one night, and I told him, like, this mountain bike thing is really big. You should be making mountain bike version of Race Tech, And he said to me, no, you need to do it because I don't ride mountain bikes. You're the enthusiast. You know the application, and you have the ability to do the design. So just get somebody to make the stuff for you, and you just do what I do, but for mountain bikes. Yeah. So I had that in the back of my mind. Okay. Like, okay, yeah, that would work. I could kind of use the Race Tech thing as well. So I had a couple of ideas that kind of were the basis for the company. And then, so kind of formulated doing the suspension kind of service and tuning because nothing was really available at the time. It wasn't really a great resource.
Why did you think that would work? I guess you were doing it with like the Marzocchi stuff in Cannondale back in the day. Like it was kind of something you had known, but was suspension at the time not good enough? Did it need servicing? Did it need...
Yeah, it really comes from my exposure in motorsports, right? So I was always around race cars. I was always around motorcycle racing and suspension tuning companies and suspension upgrade components. And I mean, there were a dime a dozen, right? If you had a dirt bike, if you were in Southern California and you had a Honda CR and you wanted to get the suspension tuned or upgraded, there's 25 different guys.
But that didn't exist in mountain biking.
Didn't exist in mountain biking. Yeah. Huh. And you had TF Tune that was kind of, Tim Flukes was doing some servicing stuff. And I think I don't know if Hippie Tech came first. Remember Hippie Tech?
Yeah.
Jerry
Vanderpool. He lives right around here. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So he might've been doing some service stuff because he left RockShox and I think he was doing some service. But there wasn't really a resource, for that. And certainly nobody was upgrading or tuning. No one was saying, oh, okay, you weigh 240 pounds. Maybe you have some needs that, average Joe doesn't.
More than a spring.
Right, exactly. Okay. And so it was combining my passion for mountain bikes with my exposure in other industries where this was normal. Like this was just every day. Yeah. So that was kind of, the base idea. And I had my childhood hero, Richard Cunningham, right, from Mountain Bike Action Days. Well, I had now come to know him through, the Marzocchi days and whatnot. And actually, Richard was one of the first people I contacted. And I just said, hey, or no, I don't think I contacted him. I think we ran into each other like Sea Otter or something. And I said, this is what I'm looking to do. I'm looking to start this company that does suspension tuning and servicing and as a resource for customers to ask questions and, because nobody understood the technology. They still don't today, right? Yeah. It changes all the time. And I said to him, but in order to do it, I need to somehow let the world know. Would you help me out on this? Yeah. And it was awesome because he's a guy that I'd idolized as a kid. And he just said, no problem. He says, once you're up and running, call me and I'll come check it out.
And he was at Mountain Bike Action.
Yeah.
That's sick. And he's got a big moto background too, right? Like, so did he understand kind of the premise?
Yeah, it's not even that, right? Richard's he's a guy who's got interest in everything, right?
Yeah.
He loves all things technology.
Yep.
Yeah. So whether it's, Zeppelin blimps or motorcycles, right? I mean, the guy's,
he knows about it.
Yeah. Anybody who knows Richard, the guy's involved in everything. So that's what happened. So we basically designed the first parts. We rented out a space. We had this initial concept of working on a Fox Vanilla RC shock.
Okay.
That was our one product that we were going to focus on. And I rung Richard, and it was the coolest thing because he came to Irvine, and we went. The office was kind of across the street from Irvine Spectrum. And I remember we went over to Wolfgang Puck's, and he had his notepad out, and I sat there with Richard, and we talked about push, and then he came back and shot some photos, and it was probably so. I officially moved into the space in October of 2003, had it running by maybe December, and in April there was a 2-page spread of mountain bike action.
Yeah. 1
page of text and another one of just some images of Push Industries and Darren Murphy.
Yeah.
And the phone immediately started to ring.
No way.
And so I owe a lot of credit to Richard because he really was the one who jump-started it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you had the foresight to at least ask for the opportunity, like, hey, I'm going to do this, but if no one hears about it, who cares, right?
Yeah. And that was obviously like pre-internet social media. Like that wasn't, there was message boards were starting to show up.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and again, no marketing genius over here, right? So not like, I'm
you
sure
sell yourself short on that one.
Well, at that time, I'm sure there was ways that I could have reached people, but I didn't necessarily know what they were,
Yeah. And okay, so orders are coming in. Like what happens? You're just servicing the RC, the Vanilla RC right now.
Vanilla RC. So we had some upgrade components, some tuning items, and I was able to, Fox had come out with Pro Pedal, and we'd created our own Pro Pedal aftermarket kit.
Okay.
And so you could have a non-Pro Pedal shock turned into a Pro Pedal shock, so that was a big deal. Because Pro Pedal, Fox at the time was still quite large in marketing, and so when they said Pro Pedal is the way to go, then everybody wanted to go Pro Pedal.
Yep.
And so the fact that we could take your last year's shock and put Pro Pedal into it was a big deal.
Okay. Was that a big deal to Fox, or are they like, hey, who's this guy trying to keep people from buying our new stuff?
Yeah, well, so if rewind to the bike shop days in Connecticut, is when I first met Mario Galasso, so who now is the head of Fox.
Okay.
So back in the day, Mario was head of engineering at Cannondale. I think he was, I don't know what his exact title was, but big guy at Cannondale in engineering. Actually hired me at Cannondale, which is a job I couldn't take. I accepted the job, and then something came up with our family, and I wasn't able to take it.
Yeah.
But I met Mario back in the Cannondale days, and then when I started Push, Mario, I think, was maybe the head of engineering at Fox. He was definitely like Bob's right-hand man.
Okay.
So Mario had a heavy hand in the engineering department at Fox. And so he knew what we were doing, and I would see him at Big Bear, and we had some conversations, and they weren't super excited. Mario understood it because he was a big motorcycle guy.
Okay, yeah.
So he knew about factory connection and pro circuit.
Yeah, they all get along, right?
Yeah. And so Mario, we were treading lightly, because Fox wasn't certainly going to help me in any way. Most of the people there didn't really care for it. Mario was staying neutral, and kind of like, I get it, I know what you're doing, but understand this is what may reflect poorly, So he was, at the time, I can appreciate, he was kind of giving me some guidance as to, hey, the language that you're saying right now about upgrades and our stuff not being that good is not really the way to do it, right? And I was looking at it saying, well, that's not my intention. I want to be a tuner. I'm not saying your stuff sucks. The reason I'm working on it is because I think it's good. But the messaging wasn't coming out right. Okay. So anyway, Mario was there kind of, nudging me a little bit. So I had a bit of a relationship with Fox because of Mario's position. Okay. But I don't think they weren't like jumping up and down. Let's just say that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It seems like everyone's to a point now where it's expected you can have these outside tuning facilities. Like what did it take to get
there?
You're
welcome, by the way, all you independent suspension tuners.
Where do you go? How does it keep growing? Like you start with the Vanilla RC, which You and I talking on the way here a little bit, like kind of this focus to do one thing well.
Yeah.
Was that a conscious decision back then? Like, I'm just going to focus on the vanilla RC rather than like try and take on a handful of different things to start?
It really came down to resources.
Okay.
The company was me.
Yep.
So everything.
That's all you could do.
Yeah. Clean the toilet, clean the workbench, buy paper towels, design parts, answer the phone. It was one person. The vanilla RC, I was super familiar with, had a relationship with Sven and Anka, which morphed into the Turner Honda team, which were running that. I think it was the single beam DHR that you couldn't fit a vanilla RC. It didn't accommodate a piggyback.
Okay.
And so I made a remote reservoir, the famous remote reservoir shocks that showed up at Sea
came
Otter.
from you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I made the remote reservoir shocks, and Turner Honda showed up at the very opening round at Sea Otter with 1, data acquisition in 2004, and 2, remote reservoir DHX shocks, which, or not DHX, vanilla RCs.
Yep.
And so that was just a package. Like, I had the parts and pieces and could manage that one product.
Okay.
But the idea of having more designing and managing, having outside manufacturing done, all that stuff it was just too much.
Okay. When does it turn into branching out past the vanilla and hiring people, and like, how does the momentum go?
Yeah. So I basically got to a point where we had some pretty good momentum, and that whole Turner Honda, because Sven and Anka, they brought a lot of exposure to a lot of people in Southern California. So then we had a lot of walk-in business too. So I was getting pretty busy pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Because Sven and Anka were riding the stuff and promoting it, and it got, so much traffic that I needed help. So then I hired my first guy. So a guy that I'd known from Romic days, which was Jimmy Donahue, who's now at RockShox.
Yeah. He put the guts in that pike and that.
I'll take a second look at it then. Jimmy's still a good buddy of mine, even to this day. But so I hired Jimmy, and he was now could wrench full time, so I could do phones, and then that turned into both of us doing phones. So it started to grow a little bit in that whole Southern California. We really kind of focused on the Southern California thing in the Northern Nationals with the Turner Honda program. So just supplying and servicing those guys, and just started to gain some momentum and some message boards, and just started to get busy. And then the demand came for more, so then people started saying, hey, I want more.
Was it mostly downhill bikes? Like with that shock, like there weren't coil shocked enduro bikes really back then. Yeah.
There wasn't. The only one that we had some real success with was the, I think it was a Turner, I don't know, it was an XCE or a burner or something like that came with a weird size. It was a 6 3/4, 1 3/4 vanilla RC back in the day, which nobody was doing.
Okay.
But we had Turner was selling a lot of those bikes, and we were getting a lot of those shocks. Because again, Southern California, right? David's in Southern California, we were there. But yeah, it was mainly downhill bikes, which I think I'm almost positive we went from the coil shock into the air shock, the float shock.
Okay.
Was, I think, the second product that we did, because it was similar enough that we started doing float shocks. I think was second, because I think forks were last.
Okay.
Pretty sure the fork. And matter of fact, I remember specifically saying we weren't going to do forks. I remember that was not going to be our thing.
Yeah.
Much like we were never going to make a shock. Right? But yeah, we were never going to do. I don't say never anymore, by the way. But yeah, the coil morphed into the air shock, which then morphed into the vanilla forks, and then the float forks, and next thing you know it, we had something. Yeah.
And is this, you say you took money from your home equity to start the business. Are you seeing that this is, or it's going to be profitable, or, is there struggle town back in the day? Are there enough vanilla RCs coming through that you can make a living? Yeah.
So back in the day, that first year for sure was no problem. There's 2 of us. Payroll wasn't high. We were loving it. It's like Southern California dreaming, building suspension. People really liked what we were doing. So we were kind of on a high because customer feedback was awesome, and, just a lot of positive energy all the way around. So we're riding bikes and building suspension, and we've got this cool new thing, and media is starting to, draw some attention. So now, you go to Sea Otter and there's spy shots of, stuff that we're doing, and, we're kind of relevant, right?
Yeah.
And so, it was all really good. And I had no business background, so we were just buying and selling. So I can honestly say that we weren't paying attention. Business was good enough. I think that's what happens a lot, right? You get started into something because you're passionate about it. The business starts to make some money. I wasn't paying attention to how much, or certainly didn't have the business background, but was able to pay our bills and buy more stuff.
You're in the black enough to keep going.
Like we're keeping going. So I couldn't tell you how profitable we were, but it was a profitable business.
Sure.
And was moving forward. So, yeah.
Okay. Keep us going down the...
Yeah. And so, it started to grow. We needed another employee. My wife and I were daydreaming about moving out of Southern California because my oldest son was getting ready to start kindergarten.
Okay.
A Colorado trip came up for my wife. She fell in love, maybe not fell in love, but really liked Fort Collins, Colorado. We sold our house in the heyday. That was when house values were really high in California. So we cashed out of our house there. Jimmy and Tammy I don't think they were married yet.
Yeah.
I can't remember, but Jimmy was willing to move to Colorado as well. So we packed up everything and moved to Colorado. And started looking for, we got a new space, and that was crazy. We moved from this 800 square foot warehouse in Irvine that was, paying like $1,500 a month.
Dang, 800 square feet?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's smaller than something.
Yeah, for like $1,500 a month, which was absurd at the time. And then we go to Colorado, and I think we got like 2,000 square feet for maybe $800.
Crazy.
And it was just like, oh man. And it looked enormous at the time. Like, holy cow, this thing is massive. Moved to Colorado and just kept the momentum going. And because obviously the scene in Colorado was good too.
Yeah.
So was able to hire another person and then just started continuing to expand the product line until it actually, became kind of an animal. Back in, at the peak, we had 7 full-time technicians and we were doing approximately 8,000 Fox forks and shocks a year.
Jeez.
Out of our facility in Colorado.
Yeah. And is that when you're strictly service focused with some like aftermarket parts in there?
Yeah, that was 95% upgrades and 5% service. Nobody was coming to us. If you needed a fork serviced, you'd go back to the manufacturer, or maybe a local bike shop could do a little bit of something because it was so much cheaper.
Yep.
Everybody was coming to us for the tuning parts. That was everything.
Okay.
Yeah.
And clearly the bikes, the riders are realizing like this is something that they want.
Yeah. The move to Colorado, the growing up of the internet and the message boards and the online advertising and the articles. And we started to get a lot more play because we were doing something interesting, I think. I think from a content perspective, Litter Mag and Vital and these companies, it's like, hey, they're doing some cool stuff and it's radical and no one's, I haven't seen this before. So we were getting a lot of content, which just fed the machine, right? So that just kept moving it more and more forward.
How much of it's a different anodized knob or something, like just a little bit of external bling that people can see? Like how much of that makes people want to have it?
Yeah, it does.
Because you're like, I'm no marketer, but those red fork tubes, your knobs, like you know to make it look different enough.
Yeah, we knew that we wanted, I wanted people to know there was something in there. Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah. So it wasn't, I look at it now and say, okay, yes, that's a marketing tactic. But in the day, I wanted people who bought the money to be able to show up at the trailhead and somebody, their buddy go, oh, hey, what's that?
Yeah.
Get them talking about it because I wanted the word of mouth to spread, because that's what's crazy. The first 8 years in business, we never ran an advertisement. We never did any marketing. It was just literally word of mouth. It was the most organic growth you could have, which has been part of the keys to our success. Is we've grown up as a legitimate brand and a legitimate product. People know that, yes, you're getting this cool anodized knob, but they've spent a hell of a lot of time on what's going on underneath it, you know? And that's been a big staple for me and why we've invested so heavily in engineering and testing and manufacturing and dynos and data logging and CNC, you know, it's like we build a legitimate product, and I tell our people all the time, we've just got an amazing team of people at Push, and it is a team of people, and we all are driving the same thing, which is making legitimate products. We're never going to do something where it looks pretty, but it doesn't really. It has to have a significant effect, because I feel like our customers grew up with us with a certain performance expectation. And that's the expectation of all new customers too, because they've heard it, right? They know the Push brand is from people who, I had this or I had that and transformed it and really nailed it. And now I just like my product so much better, or I love their product, or whatever it is. And so we can never lose sight of that, right? We always have to it has to be legitimate, or we won't do it. Sure. Which goes back to new applications, or why does it take so long for you guys to come up with a new product? It's like,
so how do you do that? Like, I'm guessing at the beginning, your knowledge from motorsports industry and all that, was it pretty easy for you to understand how to make a vanilla RC better without a boatload of testing or a ton of kind of piece creation for it? But then you start getting into manufacturing and making all these pieces, and it like way more in-depth testing, I'm assuming.
Yeah, 100%.
How does that transition happen? And it seems, are you keeping it all USA based? Like it's all made at home?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We're doing it the hard way. We joke about it all the time, you know.
Philosophy, like why do it that way? Why make it yourself? What kind of testing goes in? You've got dynos, machines, like none of this stuff's cheap.
No.
What's it like?
It's, I don't know. It's just the way I'm wired, I guess, you know, and I do look at it and say it is the hard way. And again, it's another thing we joke about at Push, you know, how much effort we put into something, or how hard I drive a department to do something, when it doesn't have to be done at that level. But I don't know. It's just the way I'm wired. I'm a Formula One, MotoGP, you know, just want the best, you know, want to make the best stuff. And
was there like a conscious first product where you're like, all right, this is going to step it up a notch more than some shims or spacers? I don't know what goes in there, but you know what I mean? Where you're like, all right, this is a bigger deal for us.
Well, definitely the 11.6. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But even all the, like
no, because
the guts products.
So if I was to take a look at, if I was to say, okay, let's look at Push as a company from start to where we are today, I would say that we came out with some good products. So the first, you know, the early days, first few years of Push, we had some good products, but they weren't thoroughly vetted enough. You know, I remember working with a consumer level product with Eric Carter. So I got hooked up with Eric Carter when he was riding another Turner, single beam Turner, couldn't take a reservoir shock. That was Mongoose, right? It was the Mongoose days. Yeah. So I did all the Northern Nationals with EC and supported his rear suspension with one of those remote reservoir vanilla RCs. And I remember what worked so well for a consumer-based product, he would eat up in a race weekend. Yeah. And there was some things that I missed, you know, because again, I didn't have the resources because I was a one-man show. And so I look at, so the early days, it's like, yeah, we had a good product, but the testing and kind of follow through. I could see now, at the time I couldn't see why Fox, you know, Mario specifically was looking at me going, you know, maybe you should reconsider doing this. At the time, like, no, this is great. Looking back, I'm like, oh, yeah, now I can appreciate why they looked at it and said, this isn't so great. It was the execution. Like it just needed a few things to make it better. And so, you know, the first few years we were making good products, and then it started, but there was a lot of learning that happened in a short period of time. I look at 5 years as being a short period of time. Like for company growth and the product growth, a lot of that happened. And it was really after that 5-year mark was when we had more dedicated testing. We had hired a mechanical engineer, you know, someone who really knew his stuff. Okay. And so then we got more serious about it, right? So then that's when you start talking about dynos, and we had our own mill, our own lathe, data logging, so we were really getting serious about it. So we could take my initial ideas and just execute them in a way that was much more refined, much better, much safer.
And bringing that manufacturing in-house, did that save time? Was it just a matter of headache and time?
No. So manufacturing for us, the reason we were quite happy outsourcing manufacturing.
Okay.
That wasn't too big of a deal. Use local machine shops, and wasn't too big of a deal. It was basically 2008 when the market started to crash, and heading into 2009 that the people who were machining our parts were getting hit harder than we were. So our business, what we found during that period of time, people would rather send their suspension to push than buy a new one because
money's tight. It's the smarter thing to do, right?
Yeah. So instead of buying a $1,000 fork, I'm going to spend $285 at push.
Okay.
So our business didn't actually decline that much, but our parts supply did. And so we were really struggling to keep up with parts. And that's when I'd seen an advertisement for a Haas, distributor in Denver. And so I just rung them up. And at that time, machine sales were in the toilet, right? Nobody was buying any of that stuff. So I had a team of I exaggerate and say 10 people. It was probably 2 guys, but but they were there the next day.
Frothing we might get a sale.
Yeah. Like the next day. And so it's kind of funny because I look back at it and I showed them what the part was that we wanted to make. And they're like, oh, no problem. And I said, really? And they, oh yeah, you guys, you got engineers and you already have a manual mill and lathe, so you understand it. No problem. You buy this machine, you can get set up, no problem. We'll help support it. Looking back, I'm like, I can't believe we pulled that off because the part was so complex. It was sales guys.
Well, was it a piston or something?
No, it was the head unit for our MX tune. So it was what we call the bridge. So it was the eyelet cap that connected the shock body to the reservoir.
Okay.
Big mill part. And a lot of complex geometry and tight tolerances. And yeah, the Haas guys were like, no problem.
But
you guys have never done this before, but I'm telling you, you guys have got it dialed. And so we bought, that's what started it. So we bought that first machine and we did end up making that part successfully. It was a lot of trial and error. The Haas guys were really great about supporting us. Probably because they didn't have a lot of customers at the time, so they could focus on us. But we ended up making it. And then that gave us a much bigger peek inside of CNC manufacturing and costs and capabilities and flexibility. And it was like, this is interesting. What if we did bring it in-house? And over the next, 3 or 4 years, we ended up buying a couple more Haas machines. We ended up getting a lathe. We ended up getting a bigger 4th axis mill. And that was the time where we made parts. We weren't a manufacturer, but we made parts.
Okay.
Yeah.
And was that strictly for push? Did you use your machines for other work outside?
No, we didn't do any contract work. I was, I've always been a motorsports fan. And so I had some side jobs I was doing for some motorcycle race teams and stuff. And it's looking back, it was a lot of work. Kind of cool. Like Jake Gagne won championship road racing on a bunch of stuff that we made. So a bunch of prototype parts that I made, I should say, on the weekends and stuff. But no, we
strictly for the business.
Yeah, basically. For all intents and purpose, it was business related. Yeah.
All right. So enter the 11.6. I'm never going to make a shock.
Never. Nope.
You made a shock.
0 chance.
And I remember you pulling Brandon and I aside at Sea Otter, like you had it in like a little duffel bag almost.
No, it's Interbike.
What did I say?
Sea Otter.
I meant Interbike. Yeah.
Interbike, yeah.
Yeah, we're in that upstairs hallway. We're like, look at this thing. Where'd it come from? Why would you do this? And the model of it, which still like the business model of it being high end, super custom, it's $1,200.
Yeah.
Why did you think that would work?
So it started, like I said, in the heyday, the tuning business for us was really well established. We had TF Tuned in the UK, so Tim Fluke's operation, installing all of our stuff. We were doing a boatload of products in the US. The demand for finished product was really high. Like almost daily, someone was sending us an email, hey, can I just buy a tuned shock from you, or, hey, can I just buy a tuned fork from you instead of sending mine in?
Yeah.
Because they didn't want the downtime.
Right.
Hey, my shock's fine, but my buddy's got one from you guys. He's raving about it. And can I just buy a Fox float already tuned, brand new? Mm-hmm. And so we struggled to be able to pull that off, mainly because, again, Fox wasn't really in a position to really help our business.
Yeah, like they don't want to sell you 1,000 shocks for you to tweak and sell to someone else, basically.
And the messaging, right? I understand. And at the time, I was very frustrated, but now I look back and I understand. Okay, I get it. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want somebody buying 11.6s and modifying them and then selling them as theirs, you know?
Yeah.
So I get it.
Yep.
So we were having that demand and wondering what we're going to do with it, because we couldn't work out any pricing or the ability to do it with Fox, which I understood. At the same time, we were having part supply problems. So our tuning business had gotten so large that we were relying on so many Fox parts, dials and caps and this, things that we're not going to ever make, right? But you just have to have so many spare parts, air shaft rods and crown steer units and, like all this stuff. So hundreds of thousands of dollars in inventory of parts to support the service department. And Fox was going through some changes, and so supply was changing. In the early days, you had a 3 models of fork, right? You had a float, vanilla, and you had a talus, and 32 millimeters, and only had 2 colors. But with the advent of all the wheel sizes and offsets, and so all the SKUs and all the shocks they were making now, all the different types of, the RP, the RP2, the RP23, the catalog was expanding. So I understand why, for them, like they can't keep everything in stock for every part all of the time. So we were starting to have some part supply problems to where it was really impacting our business, because customers were frustrated with us because we couldn't get a job done. It'd take us 2 or 3 weeks, and it's because we're waiting on a dial.
Yeah. Jeez.
But it's on us, right? Because we have the product, not Fox.
Yeah, you can't blame Fox.
And it's not a blame thing. It's just the reality of the business is changing. We're growing. They're growing. Their way they're doing business is different. The way we're doing business is different. So we've got this demand for complete product. We've got some problems with supply. And the idea had been thrown out a couple of times about making a shock, because we made parts.
And what year is this-ish?
This would have been 2011. Okay. Maybe. Yeah, 2011. So the economy's coming back. Businesses, bike businesses, getting back up on pace. So we've got those two things kind of happening, and a company that's growing. We've got responsibilities. We've got employees now, that have families, and we've got employees now where, they support their family, so, and we take that pretty seriously at Push, we really believe in all of our people. So what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And there was a final moment that I don't want to talk about, but I won't mention it publicly. But yeah, with one of the vendors, we bumped heads, and I just came out of my office. I went downstairs, and I just was like, "We are making a shock," and everybody did the yeah, we're gonna make a shock. And I said, because I had already done this before, right? But this was no. We are going to make a shock. Oh, and actually, I'm going to rewind that one other second. So we had the MX tune, which was for the DHX, which was really successful for us. And I had come up with, so all of the years of suspension tuning, people would say, when you ask them about riding style or what they're looking to get out of their suspension, with on-the-fly adjustable suspension, it was always, well, give me the plushest of the plush and the firmest of firm. And we'd explain to them, well, you can't do that because it's one single compression unit. And so if you want it to be really firm when you flip the lever, it's going to take away from some of the small bump sensitivity and vice versa. And so we always had that compromise. So I'd had this idea of having 2 valves that you could toggle between to be the next generation MX tune. But because we were having supply issues, and specifically at that time, it was on that DHX, like shafts and things like that. It's like I didn't want to introduce a product that people weren't really going to be able to get because we couldn't do it because of replacement parts. And at the same time, I thought it was too significant of a technology to want to bolt onto somebody else's. So I had that kind of in my pocket too. I'd already had the concept of the dual valve thing.
Okay.
So then I bump heads with a certain vendor and come downstairs and announce, we're making a shock. Everybody, yeah, we're making a shock. No, we're going to make a shock. Wait, what? Like, you look serious this time. Like, yeah, we're doing it. And that was the day. That was it. The day we decided to do it. And I didn't know what it looked like. But we were then going to find out.
All right. So where do you go?
Well, then we got to work.
Did it put other things on hold? I mean, because you can't just turn off your tuning business and let's make a shock.
Yeah, I mean, at that time, I took sole responsibility for the design. And so everything that I was involved in got set aside, and every single day, all I was doing was working in SolidWorks, laying this thing out. So feverishly working in SolidWorks all day, all night. And the rest of the business was still moving forward because at that point in 2011, I'm not building shocks anymore. I should have been doing other things, more important things. But for me, I had this singular focus. We're going to make this shock. So started laying it out. And then we got to a point where one of our engineers, I kind of got the package that I wanted and then handed it off to an engineer to make everything, fix all the rough edges and make this thing work. And then we started looking at, what it would take. We had to move from being a company that made parts to being a manufacturer, because now we've got to make the whole thing. And what does that look like?
You didn't want to outsource this.
We didn't.
Nope.
No, we just felt like, our DNA was we are creators. We build stuff. And I also felt like if we were to outsource it and assemble it, then what makes us different than anybody else? I mean, that's what the other guys are doing.
Yeah.
So then we become the other guys. And so that wasn't really interesting to me. We didn't know what the pricing or anything was going to be like. We built two mules basically. So we had two kind of design paths, two different products.
Okay.
One had a price cap of $800 and one had no price cap.
Okay.
One was just like, throw anything you want at it.
And how long was that from we're going to make a shock to the mules?
It was fast. Within the year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So within the year we had the mules built.
And obviously the $800 one
went
out the window for right now. Yeah.
Yeah. It lost out from a performance standpoint. It lost out from a performance standpoint. That was the first thing. Blind testing, because we used to ride the shocks with socks on them so nobody could see them, which was a running joke in local Fort Collins, Oddly enough, the funniest thing was there was a whole group of people that thought we were developing, they thought it was the greatest idea in the world that we were developing a shock sock to protect for muddy conditions. Not knowing that underneath that was
a prototype.
Yeah.
Shock sock.
But so it was something where we built these mules, decided that the price cap one was really difficult for us to get, I think, even competitive. It was kind of, at the time, competitive with what was available. But if those manufacturers, which we knew were in development of something, came out with something new, we'd probably be in a bad position, right? Huh. So you can't just be competitive with what's here today, because we're going to lose that one, and we could lose it immediately after we launch. So that's not a good idea. And then I also thought, well, wait a minute. How many people work here? We've got like 10 people at this time, maybe 10 or 12 people. We can't build that many, if the demand comes in, we can't even build that many,
Yep.
So there's that. That's a limiting factor. One, we don't even know if we can make all of these things simultaneously or in an effective manner to build the whole product at once.
Okay.
And two, if there's a big demand for it, because remember, we're doing thousands of Fox forks and shocks in our tuning business. And so if, a small percentage of that customer base just buys one from us, how can we make it? Yeah. I mean, can we, if someone, we wanted to sell 500 shocks right now, we can't even do that. We don't have the ability to.
Yeah.
So then we started looking at that. And so, okay, well, the cost cap is no good from a performance standpoint. Not to mention if it's a reasonably priced product and demand goes up, we won't be able to fill it. We really want to build this one, because this one from a ride, just seat of your pants, like riding it on the trail, it is better. It's just a better product. This is what we want to go to market with. This is, again, who we are. We want to build a legitimate product. So great. Boom, let's do it. And I said, I think this one's going to be $1,000. And the guys at the shop, were just like, whoa, I don't think we can do that.
Yeah.
And I said, I don't know how else we can.
Alternative,
yeah, we don't have the option. If we're going to build it this way, and that's the thing that people don't understand, all the effort that goes into making the product, not assembling it, but like manufacturing and, the quality process. I mean, the whole thing. So anyway, we decided that was the path that we were going to go down. And at the end of the day, we did a pilot run and started riding the finished version. It was all of our pieces. It wasn't all anodized, but because it started off as mix of Fox parts and our parts for the prototypes, testing out the dual overhead valve system and some of the systems. And then we slowly got more and more to where we got to the point, okay, now all of our bikes are riding a shock that only has push components and has the Hyperco spring, because we'd work with Hyperco on the rear spring.
Okay.
So we were at this point, okay, it's 100% push product. Now what do we do? Okay. The pilot run showed us how difficult it was going to be to make, which gave me a whole new appreciation for companies like Fox and RockShox that make the volume that they make at the quality level they make. I know it's easy in today's day and age to bag on those companies.
Mass-produced,
yeah, not only that, but it's just, like you see where someone has a quality problem, where something doesn't thread down right, or, and they get blasted. And it's like, man, I understand what it takes to build the small volume that we do. The volume that those guys make, I mean, it's incredibly impressive to me. I have a whole new appreciation.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, it's crazy when you look and say, okay, well, Fox is roughly building 1,000 forks and shocks a day at that level of quality. I mean, yeah, whole new appreciation for what they do.
Yeah.
Being in the position that we're at now.
Interesting. So what got you over the hurdles to make it happen?
Well, we just, we made it. We loved the product. We were riding it. And then we said, we can't, it's going to be expensive. Now we knew it couldn't be 1,000 even. Now it was going to be 1,150. And then, okay, it's really got to be $1,200, which is scary, but there's no way around it. We're using U.S. sourced raw materials. We're using premium materials, premium coatings. We're CNC manufacturing the entire thing in our building. We're hand assembling. I mean, it's just on and on and on.
Yeah.
The amount of man hours that goes into that is massive. No way around it. Own it. Let's do it. And it'll be, we measure success by the product and the people who do buy it, how they feel about it. We don't have to sell 10,000 of them to be successful. We can sell 10 of them and have customers who really are stoked, who are like, yeah, I paid the money. It's worth it. I love dealing with the guys. It's not just the product. It's the whole customer service experience. It's worth the money. And that's how we gauge success. It wasn't, we're never going to be Fox. We're never going to be RockShox. We're never going to be those guys. But our measure of success is, do we build a legitimate product that people who bought it would buy it again?
Yeah.
Right. And that's what we did. So we finally come up with a $1,200 price range. We're ready to kind of start wrapping things up. And all of a sudden there's some suspension problems in the marketplace. There's a manufacturer that's having some problems with some shocks in the marketplace.
Okay.
And so we're really second guessing ourselves to deliver a product. So we actually put
that doesn't make you think like, oh, there's going to be a hole we can fill. It
makes me nervous that, have we spent enough time on this thing?
Okay.
Because at this price point, it has to come out and it's
got to be flawless,
executed perfectly. Love or hate the aesthetic, at least the build quality is like something you've never seen before. The customer service experience, the product experience, everything's got to be great. We talked about it. The greatest fear was someone would get an 11.6 and go, yeah, it's pretty good. Whoa. Wait, what?
Yeah.
Wait, what? Oh, that's like, that to us is not success.
Yeah.
Oh, it's pretty good. Oh, pretty good. No. And it's because we don't want to take your hard-earned money at that price level and have you have a pretty good experience. We don't want that.
Yep.
We want you to be in a position where it's like, this thing is amazing. I love it. I love the buying experience. I love the support. I love the product. No question. My next bike is going to have one of these things. Okay, great. So anyway, there was some problems in the marketplace. So we actually held back and we rode the product for an entire year. So, we released the product, what was it? March of 13, I think. It was ready March, April-ish of 12.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we rode it for an entire summer.
Yeah.
A bunch of us just smashing on them, just trying to
kill it.
Yeah. Just trying to see any weird quirks. We started to let other people ride it outside of our organization because they would use it differently than we would because we knew what everything was. And so what happens when you start giving it to people that are just going to jam the lever and jam the dials or whatever it is. And so we did that for a year prior to launch. So we knew when we went to launch it, we knew when we went to market, it's expensive, but it's durable. Like we know the product is going to be durable. We know it's high performance.
And it's basically a fully custom thing. Like with the experience you get, quickly walk through. I want an 11.6. I call push.
Yeah.
What happens?
Yeah, I mean, that's I think probably a big surprise is people come to push and you don't see shelves of 11.6s. You see bins of the most beautiful machine parts you've ever seen. Our manufacturing group is awesome. And so you place an order and we build you something. We take into there is one misconception I will clear up, which is 85% of the custom build in an 11.6 has to do with the bike and not the rider. So, for instance, we get this question asked a lot. Well, how are you able to build a shock for Evil, for instance, and have it come on the bike? Well, Evil, we have so if you take a Evil offering, we have 3 different damper specs that cover the different rider weights. So if you're, so the shock has been custom built towards the kinematics of that bike. So the rod bumpers and the valves and the machine. So we actually, not just valving, we actually machine different flow valves. So if you take the shock apart and pull out a piston or a valve from a offering and then pull out a piston or a valve from like a Yeti SB6, it's like, no, these parts are different. They're actually different. And so the customization is really more bike driven. So we get in a new mega tower and we work with the kinematics. And so the rod bumpers and the compression valves and the pistons and the valving and all that stuff, it's all a combination of things, a recipe that optimizes it for the bike. And that's really where the bulk of the work is done. And then we have different damper specs inside of that rider range. So again, if we take the offering, off the top of my head, we have at least 3, if not 4 damper specs. And so Evil warehouses the dampers and the springs separately. And so when you place an order, they marry them. So they have our chart that says, hey, if you're 160 pounds, you get a 400-pound spring and damper spec 211. Like that's what's optimized for that bike and that rider weight. Okay. So we still do build them, from scratch. It's not a production line. We still have suspension techs. The techs that used to build, tune suspension, these guys with years of experience, best in the business, are the guys who do the final assembly of 11.6 now. But yeah, you call up, say, hey, or you order it through the website, give us all your rider notes. And if you're on the border of spring rates, you might need a little bit more in-depth interview to find out what you're going to be doing with the bike. Okay. But yeah, the big thing is if you can take 2 11.6s out of the same size, take a mega tower, I guess. If you take a mega tower and Gorilla Gravity Mega Trail, the shocks physically are the same size, but the internals and some of the parts and pieces are actually completely different. And that's really the biggest part of the recipe. Okay. Yeah.
And as a customer of one, I have access to a tech to discuss things, help me get it set up, all that good stuff.
Yep. 100%.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So every shock comes out of the box ready to go. So because we've taken into consideration, and by the way, so every bike that we have an application for, we have owned, so we get a bike from the manufacturer or buy it from a shop or whatever we have to do. Pretty much all of them come from the manufacturers. Sometimes, we have to buy them, but we get the bikes in and we do all the research and development. We do all of the spring rate guides. We do everything. So yes, if you want a shock, it comes out of the box ready to ride. You literally can pull it out of the box, bolt it into your bike and go ride it. The clickers have all been set. The preload's been all set. And you have a card that shows where everything has been set from the factory for you. We have some cheat guides for setup tips and things like that, but absolutely. So if you buy an 11.6 and you go out and ride it and you're like, hey, this is what it's doing and I want to make a change, but I don't know how to, you literally can email the guy that built the shock.
Yeah.
Or you can phone up Push and ask for Dave, and Dave will take your call and he'll say, and Dave rides the shock, by the way, so he has it on his bike or whoever. But the point is, you can talk to the technician that built it. He knows the entire history of the build. He can look up the dyno charts because we dyno every single shock and catalog every single damping force characteristic of every shock that we built. So he can say, here's what I recommend that you do, because that is one of the big advantages. There's so much suspension technology and there's so much adjustment. People don't know what to do though. Like, what do I do with these things? 11.6 included, right? There's a lot of things you can turn.
Yep.
Where do I start? So two things. 80% of 11.6's characteristic is pre-built at the factory. 20% is controlled by the external user.
Okay.
Whereas a production shock is the opposite. 20% is preset and 80% is up to you, the rider, to figure out how to optimize it for your bike and then your rider weight, style, all that stuff. So you're getting a shock that has more limited adjustment range to start with on purpose.
But the guts are there.
And you don't have to learn, well, do I turn low speed, or what is low speed? Where does that affect? Or what's high speed? Or it's like, no, you can literally send us a message and say, here's what it's doing. What do I do? And we can just tell you, you want to increase your high speed compression 2 clicks and decrease your low speed compression 2 clicks, because that'll help, the initial movement a little bit, but then aid in bottoming control or whatever. But the point is, you don't have to try to figure it out.
Yeah.
That's part of what you pay for, right? It's not just the product. It's
that's the thing. Yeah, you're not
access.
just getting a box with a shock that costs $1,200. You have this
it's the
support system. Yeah.
It's basically combining our core what was our core business, what we were built on, our suspension tuning business, because that's what we did with our suspension tuning. Is you didn't just get a fork back from us. You got a fork back with all your settings, and you had a direct contact to who built it. So you could phone them and say, hey, I got my fork. It's great. Can I change the air pressure? Oh, absolutely. And this is what I'd recommend how you start. And so we built a complete product and just brought that experience along with it.
Yeah. Looks like it's recording. We're back from a potty and a water break.
Much needed.
We'll delete that. So 11.6 is 6 years old? 2013, 2019?
I might have the dates wrong.
Okay.
I think it's 4 years old, 2015.
Okay. But still, has anything changed in it besides the number of bikes it goes on?
No, we switched. We did have one upgrade, or not a little bit of an upgrade. We did change coatings. So we'd been working on a coating that we didn't think was going to be able to work for shock bodies and shafts and things like that. And so we went to market with a coating that we knew was stable, that was really solid. The only bummer is it was a great coating, but the color, it discolored differently in different regions and made the shock aesthetically not look great.
Great, but it still performed. It's just a looks factor.
Yep, no problem with the function. It was just the look, And so if you were in a more humid climate or certain types of dirt and stuff would make it, because it was an unsealed coating. But anyway, so we struggled with that a little bit. And honestly, I don't know that customers ever complained about it. It was more of our own concern, seeing shocks come back from service and have discoloration. It's like, oh man, that's no good. But we'd measure them and everything was good. And on the inside where everything matters, the coating thicknesses and the surfaces all measured properly. So we're like, okay, well, it's not affecting anything other than the color. So we did. So anyway, that led into the Micro XD coating that we use now, which is a medical coating. And that, well, not a medical coating. It was developed for the medical industry. Works really bitchin' for shock absorbers. And that was something where we made that change. That was when we went to the black shock bodies. And so the discoloration was not a problem and the coating was better.
Okay.
So that was a win-win. So, but it took us a little bit more time to kind of fully vet that and make sure it was good to go.
Okay.
And we changed the color. We finally introduced some black features last year or 2 years ago. But it's just color,
Yeah.
So
were people excited about that though? Like I remember seeing it being like, oh, that's pretty sick.
Yeah,
black now.
Everybody. No, because we didn't get an email every single day asking for a black one.
Did you really?
Yeah. We actually, oddly, yeah, it was a struggle, but I won't go any further than that. But yeah, we did black, but so it's basically the coating was early on, was year 1.5 maybe when we switched to Micro XD.
Okay.
And so that's been the same for the last 3 years or so. But yeah, the platform's the same, and it's, even saying that's kind of surprising to me. I'm like, yeah, we haven't really.
I mean, you think about the longevity in the mountain bike world, like 5 years, it's basically the same, or 4 years. Like that seems unheard of.
Well, and one thing I will say is, I guess I will expand on that a little bit. So yes, there has been a new piston design. We've changed piston bolt flow rates and a couple of things like that internally. So nothing you'd notice from the outside, but we have changed our valve design a little bit to make increased manufacturability and consistency on builds. But the point is every shock that we built has been verified. So some of the changes we've made have been for our own internal efficiencies, because as we've grown and had to make more of them, it's like, whoa, it's harder to control some of these tolerances. But what we do, here's another thing that you pay for with an 11.6 is that when you send your shock in for service, so a service on an 11.6, I think is either $155 or $159. Any of those upgrades you get at no charge. So like if we have an improved piston bolt flow rate or improved piston or something like that, those actually get installed at time of service. So you're always on the latest, you're always on the most current generation.
Okay.
But they're, in all honesty, they're just tweaks. They're not really anything.
Not a big design change.
No, I mean, it's one of those things where I don't even know that most riders would even feel the difference back to back. If we bolted on a new one. So if you had a 4-year-old shock that you've maintained properly and you got a new one with the same spec, I don't think you're going to, riding it, I don't think you'd even notice.
Yeah. Are your customers pretty on it with service and scheduled maintenance and sending it in? Like every winter, do people send them in, or they just kind of run it and let it go? No,
I think, that's the mold that we had to break too, right? Because unfortunately, I think that the suspension companies, this is just my opinion. I think the suspension companies in the bike industry overinflate, or not overinflate, but they really like to talk about the durability of their product. And when you look at how abusive, or the abuse that a suspension fork or shock goes through, it's gnarly. I just posted up a video on Instagram, and the full video is on our YouTube channel, of a small section of local trail with a data logger on one side.
Yeah, on the dyno on the other.
Real time playing it. Yeah. And when you watch that video, and that's like what, 2.5 minutes, and you see the violence that's going on in that fork, and think that's 2.5 minutes of a 3-hour ride, and a 3-hour ride I do 3 times a week. And so I think that there's should be a mindset change in the bike industry that suspension needs to be serviced more regularly. I think that the big man, and again, I don't want to sound like a jerk here, I think that they probably would like to promote that you should service it more, but it almost looks weak in the eyes of some of their competitors or something like that. You know what I mean? We've told people it needs to be serviced 12 to 18 months. So we don't put hours on it. Our product's very durable. So we've said 12 to 18 months you need to have it serviced. We work more closely with our customer base. That's one of the things that we're fortunate that we're able to do that, because we're not a mass producer. The product's expensive. People want to take care of it, so there's that aspect. So all in all, yes, I would say that we probably have the highest return for service rate of anybody in the suspension business, because people want to protect that investment. They want it working at its maximum. It's not a big investment in, $159 or whatever to have it fully gone through, inspected, and ready to go blast for another year. Yeah. We've tried to make that pretty reasonable. So yeah, I think we're good there. Okay. Yeah.
Touch on a couple things and then we'll wrap up the whole push part of it. There's going to be more than a couple things.
That's fine. Yeah.
All right. What's a suspension upgrade from a competitor that you think is good right now? This is a Brandon question. A lot of these are Brandon's.
Suspension upgrade from a competitor. I honestly, off the top of my head, I can't really think of anything. And that's just mainly because that's not a side of the business I've been really involved in a lot. I will say I've spoken to Steve up at Vorsprung a number of times. Here's one. So I don't know when it came out. It was maybe a year ago or so. Steve at Vorsprung came up with the tractive tune, I think is what they call it, which is and I actually called him and said, hey, this is really clever, because I felt the need to reach out to him, because that, being a previous suspension tuning company, I realized that coming up with, a tool to be able to really catalog this huge database of tuning was really challenging. We struggled to do it. And his tractive tune, where he came up with some kind of, it's like almost like a algorithm or a computer model for, hey, if you're this weight on this fork and riding this travel and blah, 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 he kind of had a shortcut to how to optimize that, what air pressure tokens, kind of the tuning, how to shim it appropriately and stuff. I thought that was really clever. I thought that when I saw that, like I said, it was clever enough that I actually phoned him and just said, hey man, this is, as someone who used to do this a lot, I know how difficult that must have been. Yeah. And so I think it's called tractive tuning, but he's got some upgrade valves or something like that. And not only that, but it's the modeling, the way that he's able to kind of have this automated database for doing it. I think it's clever.
Okay.
So there's one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm sure you get asked this 50 times a day too, but will you ever make a fork? And what about an air shock? You've gone headlong into the coil sprung thing. Air shocks seem like they're...
I think, we need to focus on what we do best. And obviously our investment is in coil and testing and developing and working with spring manufacturers. And coil is, we're comfortable with coil. And I think that we do it really well. No, I know that we do it really well. So air's not really something I would get too excited about from push. A fork.
Do people ask you that all the time?
Yeah. Oh yeah, okay. For sure. Yeah. We get it a lot. Again, remembering we're still a small company, and so we're limited to what it is that we can do. I don't think air is a great road for us to go down. I think there's a lot more coil opportunities and a lot more stuff to do with coil that we could do that would fit some more niche applications, maybe. I think that's kind of something that you'll see from us. The fork, we'll never make a fork.
Nah. Wait for that phone call from a distributor for you to run down the stairs. We talked about it on the way here. You kind of just touched on it a little bit, but why is Push successful as a niche brand or like a niche kind of business in our sport when so many companies like you come and go? Not just suspension, but like a pedal company or whatever, but so many people have this passion. They have the ideas that might even be good, but they don't even get to production or they're gone in a year. Like, why have you made it?
Yeah. So as we all know, our industry is made up of a lot of passionate people with great ideas, etc. I think right place at the right time was part of it for Push. Another part of it was we did grow to a size or an operation level where I had to learn the business side of it. For many years, we were riding bikes and building suspension and having a great time and living the dream. We were successful in spite of ourselves, right? I wasn't paying attention to the financials or this. It's like we were doing what people do, small business startup and having a great time. And fortunately had enough business to keep it moving forward. But there was a tipping point at which, we, like a lot of companies, struggling financially, trying to figure out your way. How do you get to the next level? Our overhead is now growing, and we can't really cut back, so we've got to increase, or what do we do? And there was a point where I had to learn. I had to learn from our accountants about forecast profit and loss. And I had to learn about balance sheets, and I had to learn about, the business side of things. Fortunately for me, part of it was my desire to learn, which not everybody has. And second was I had some really strong business mentors, which helped guide me down the path and gave me some of the ideas and gave me some of the examples, of what they had done. So I had some business mentors who said, here's a proper business plan. Here's a proper P&L, and work with your accountants and learn, so here's some examples, and you go figure out how to understand this and really know it, and then come back and we'll talk about it more. And that was I mentioned to you earlier, a year-long process. It took me a year to really learn the business side and to understand that just because, I think a lot of small companies, hey, I bought it for 10, I sold it for 15, I made money. That's the way I was, certainly. Mm-hmm. Hey, I bought it for 10, I sold it for 15, we made money. Not knowing that it cost you 16
to get
to
the
do
selling
it,
process.
Right?
Yeah.
But that didn't translate. And so today, understanding our costs and understanding our forecasting and understanding our planning and being disciplined, which has been very difficult. You've known me for years. I'm a creative product, mad scientist guy. Yeah. So to have to restrain myself and discipline myself to learn the financial aspect of it and what's healthy for the company. I even said to you earlier today, we lost some good employees over the years because we didn't have structure in our company. And that's a bummer, because I look back and say, well, yeah, health insurance is important and 401k is important, and a healthy company, healthy employees. And you got to take care of the business side of it so that you can enjoy the wheelies and skids in the parking lots and the high fives, and you've got to do that. So for me, it was just a conscious decision to say, okay, I am in over my head. I got to reach out and find some people who can help. Fortunately, I had access to some of those people, and fortunately they were willing to invest in me too, because it wasn't just, my desire, but it was also some of their heavy lifting and saying, okay, we'll guide you down the path and we'll help you with this stuff. So I've been really fortunate in that respect.
Was there anything specifically that you had to do kicking and screaming? I think profit and loss sounds way less fun than
it is
shim stacks and dynos.
Yeah. I think the frustration for me was definitely in the planning aspect of it, right? Like planning, how far do we have to, plan out next year. Plan out next year and then stay on that plan has been, and we're still not perfect. Don't get me wrong. Listen, we're in a lot better shape than we've ever been. There's always room for improvements. I think that as a company, we're always looking at continuous improvements, no ego. We just want to keep improving and listening. We know there's smarter people out there. So for me, the planning was one where, that was a tough one. Really learning how to do it properly, understanding, making the first year plan and having it be completely blown, and having someone like a business mentor sitting across the table saying, it's okay. But you had to start somewhere. I don't think anybody was thinking you were going to get it right the first time, Mm-hmm. And so now after years of doing it, now it's more methodical. Now you really understand what you're doing and it's sustainable, Yeah. It's better for the company. Listen, we've got a good group of people. We're growing, and we want to have employee success. Employee success is company success. In order to do that, you have to have a roadmap. You can't just wing it anymore.
Yeah. It sucks growing up, doesn't it?
Yeah, right?
Sweet.
But I still ride wheelies and do big skids. Okay, so.
Then you're still living the dream, aren't you? Yep. Yeah. Thanks, Darren. We're going to wrap up the push-specific portion of this.
Sure.
I'm going to make the executive decision and plan ahead right now.
All right.
That will two-part this.
Okay.
All right.
Perfect.
So stay tuned for part 2, where we're going to talk about just general suspension, tuning, designs, all that black magic voodoo stuff that this magician is what? Master of.
I don't know about that. willing to make mistakes, willing to try.
All right.
Yeah.
That's good.